But let's jump into the final topic, and that is clearly 1 through 10, ranking the NBA coaches. And we're going to welcome on our buddy Jake onto the podcast. Before we hear from our friend Jake, it's been a while. We're excited to hear from him. We're going to go through our rankings. Ricky, start us off 1 through 10.
Well, starting off at number 10, the guy we talked about last segment, Dwayne Casey of the Pistons. Then at number 9, Nick Four-Bounce Nurse. Then at 8, Mike D'Antoni of the Houston Rockets. At 7, Doc Rivers with his new gifts on the Clippers. Then at 5, Brad Stevens. Or 6, Brad Stevens. 5 is Quinn Snyder. 4 is Mike Malone. 3 is Greg Popovich. 2 is Steve Kerr. And 1 is Mike Budenholzer.
Yikes. Dave, give us your 1 through 10.
How do I follow up that?
You with accuracy.
At number 10, I've got Rick Carlisle. 9, Brad Stevens. 8, Nick Nurse. 7, Doc Rivers. 6, the psychopath Quinn Snyder. 5, Mike Malone. 4, Mike D'Antoni. 3, Steve Kerr. 2, Mike Budenholzer. And 1, Pop.
And then 1 through 10 for me. At 10, Nick Nurse. At 9, Mike D'Antoni. 8, Mike Malone. 7, Brad Stevens. 6, Steve Kerr. 5, Rick Carlisle. 4, American Psycho Quinn Snyder. 3, Mike Budenholzer. 2, Doc Rivers. And number 1, Greg Popovich. And for our cumulative rankings, at number 10, Nick Nurse of the Toronto Raptors. 9, Rick Carlisle of the Dallas Mavericks. 8, Brad Stevens of the Boston Celtics. 7, Mike D'Antoni of the Houston Rockets. 6, Mike Malone of the Denver Nuggets. 5, Doc Rivers of the Los Angeles Clippers. 4, Quinn Snyder of the Utah Jazz. Chicago accent. Quinn Snyder's of the Utah Jazz coming out. 3, Steve Kerr of the Golden State Warriors. 2, Mike Budenholzer of the Milwaukee Bucks. And 1, San Antonio Spurs head coach Greg Popovich, and arguably the greatest coach of all time, Greg Popovich, finally coming in at number 1 after Brad Stevens was our number 1 coach last year. Thank you to Ricky and Dave for giving him that credit last year.
You're welcome.
Jake, jump in. What do you think about our 1 through 10?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously going to be the glaring question that's going to go around is how the hell is the greatest coach of all time number 3 in Ricky's rankings? That's going to be the glaring one. And then the other one that really, the of all time. The one that takes me back is the fact that 2 people don't have Doc Rivers as a top 5 coach.
Thank you.
I need explanations on that one. But no, you have Rick Carlisle at number 5, so you also have problems.
Well, here's the thing, and this is what Ricky wanted to get into, and I will say, I think Rick Carlisle is a top 10 coach, and I did that strategically because I knew that Rick Carlisle would have been bounced. So I put Rick Carlisle top 5, so he would have been top 10. So I think he's a top 10 coach, but I knew you guys disrespect Rick Carlisle every single year, so I needed to make sure. It was the same thing with Favors. Favors is a great player. I needed to make sure Favors was as high as possible so he can get the most amount of respect because I know you guys are sleeping on him. So let's jump into it. What was the point that you wanted to make from last 11 through 20?
And it's not Carlisle. And this is the thing that pisses me off about these rankings. And I kind of stepped back of it a little bit because you were kind of doing what I was doing. Like when I had Pop so low last year, I had him at 6. Well, the reason I had Pop so low is so that Steve Kerr could be number 2 and Popovich wasn't 2 in our final rankings. But the thing that, I think we've had some inconsistencies in these rankings where, in my mind, these are supposed to be for rankings of the upcoming year. So with Carlisle, I don't see him as a top 10 coach this year. And the reason why is what he's done in the past does not matter as much. It's not a legacy ranking. It's a coming into this year, and based off of the team that he's had, yes, the potential is there, but to me, he's right outside the top 10 this year, whereas last year coming in, I probably even should have had him in the top 10 because these rankings should be coming into this year, not a legacy ranking. We even got a comment about that. Are these legacy or are these coming into this year?
Even with that, it's based on what they've done throughout their whole career going into this year. If we're doing that, then why isn't Frank Vogel in the top 10? Because he's going to be a playoff coach. Why isn't Luke Walton, who we're talking about the Kings possibly going to the playoffs, why isn't he in the top 10? I don't understand
because I think that...
So there's inconsistency throughout this.
Why isn't Brett Brown a top 10 coach?
And that's what I'm saying. And with me, I try to keep it coming into this year, but it's we cherry pick when we want to talk about legacy and when we don't.
No, I disagree. Rick Carlisle, I think, is a top 10 coach every single year, and he proved it. And he proved it last year. And you might say, well, this team was, horrible. This team was a top 10 pick in the NBA draft last year. But that doesn't mean he coached poorly. Look at that roster that he had. Look what he did to make sure Luka Doncic was doing the best that he could out there. He was putting J.J. Barea out there, even though Dennis Smith was a top 5 pick. He didn't care about that. He knew that Luka Doncic was the star of this team, and he needed to play J.J. Barea with him the most because that was what the play style fit best with Luka Doncic's play style. Same thing when JJ went down, he made sure that Jalen Brunson was out there. There was no talent on that Dallas Mavericks team, and we were talking about them midway through the season being a playoff team. That's on Rick Carlisle. There is one player that is a star on that team. He's 19 years old. Rick Carlisle who's the other star?
Kristaps Porzingis.
Wasn't on the team. Before the trade deadline, he wasn't on the team when they were a playoff team, or close to being a playoff team.
Before the trade deadline, he was, because he got traded.
Technically not playing at a star level, but Dirk was still a star,
Well,
Don't give him a Dirk mention. This segment's already hard enough. If you get Sean going on a Dirk roll, I can't.
Dirk last year was clearly not Dirk. So
was he a top 10 power forward?
It was a joke.
Yeah, but that's my thing. Is like this team looked fantastic before they started trading away Harrison Barnes and getting Kristaps Porzingis, but Kristaps couldn't even play last year. Mm-hmm. Before they started trading away their veterans, this team was close to a playoff spot, and that is largely due to the job that Rick Carlisle does every single year. And you look back to what he's done with low-level talent, with older players, he consistently gets into the playoffs. And that's like, you look at the Dirk teams that Dirk was playing with, I think the best player that he's played with in the past 10 years was Jason Kidd, and he was like 36 years old. He does a fantastic job year in, year out, making sure this team's competitive with low-level bad talent. This team's not able to attract big free agents. This team's not able to get high draft picks because Rick Carlisle coaches them outside of into the playoffs every single year. He does a great job to put this team into a position to win. And yes, they're not winning championships and haven't won a championship since 2011, but that team shouldn't even won that championship. They won it because of Rick Carlisle's coaching. Rick Carlisle deserves a ton of credit, and I think we just lost Jake. Yep.
He was sick of all that Rick Carlisle bullshit you were spouting.
Rick Carlisle has taken this team that has been low-level talent, without star-level talent, outside of Dirk Nowitzki, and Dirk Nowitzki's been old for years now, to consistently getting them to a competitive position, more than competitive than they should. And that's what good coaches do. Rick Carlisle deserves credit for what he's done in Dallas for the past couple of years. I don't understand this.
For me, with my rankings, I look at it to where I'm going to start at 5 because that's where you had them. And we agree but kind of disagree. We're like Doc and Quinn Snyder I have in the top 10, so I believe they're above Carlisle, but I have Malone, who I would put above him. I have Brad Stevens, I think, is a better coach. I think Dan Antoni is a better coach. Nick Nurse, Dwayne Casey, that's where maybe the debate comes in. If you're going to have Rick Carlisle, that's why I like where he is in our cumulative, because I think 9 and 10 is probably the highest. But if you have Rick Carlisle at 5, you are blatantly going off of his entire career, and that's not what this is.
But if you give him the team that Mike D'Antoni has, if you give him the team that Quinn Snyder has, if you give him the team that Brad Stevens has, if you give him the team that Mike Malone has, I do think that Rick Carlisle can be as successful, if not more successful, than those coaches. So I'm not going off of legacy, because legacy does matter, because you have to see what they've done throughout their entire career. And what he does is he raises the level of his teams consistently. And I think he can do that. And even though he's not going to the playoffs, he's won a championship before. And that's because he is a good coach. Good coaches, weirdly enough, win championships, unless they're carried by these massively great talents like LeBron. Ty Lue was carried by LeBron James. But Dirk was fantastic in that finals, but Rick Carlisle made sure that Dirk was in the best positions each and every year. And they also made sure that the LeBron James and D. Wade and Chris Bosh train were slowed down. And it's because of Rick Carlisle. So if you're saying that Mike Malone has shown that he can win a championship, he clearly cannot yet. If you're saying that Brad Stevens can win a championship, clearly he proved with Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward and Jason Tatum that he cannot win a championship yet. With Mike D'Antoni has been around forever and didn't make the necessary changes to help his team win a championship 2 years ago when they went 0 for 27 in a row from 3. This was a guy that did not make the necessary adjustments to make sure his team won games. If Chris Paul went down for Rick Carlisle in the playoffs, Rick Carlisle probably would have helped them win that game and get to the NBA Finals for the Houston Rockets. I believe Rick Carlisle could be doing this if he had the talent. My thing is he hasn't had the talent to do so.
All I'm hearing is he's got a ring, he's got a ring, he's got a ring.
Because he's a good coach.
That's all I'm hearing.
That's the...
You can be a good coach and not have a great team. I think that's where Sean's going with this.
Yes.
And that I agree with you. I think it's interesting that we look at it this way, because you look at the guys who are at the top of this list, and it almost reads like playoff seeding at times, because Greg Popovich, 20 years of the playoffs in a row, right? Or somewhere very close to that. Bud, successful with the Hawks, successful with the Bucks. Now again, playoffs. Steve Kerr, playoffs. Quinn Snyder, playoffs. That's the entire top 10. Yes, there's not a coincidence here that every team in the playoffs has a coach who is represented here. My thing is, Rick Carlisle is literally like the asterisk on this list, because if you look at everybody else, everybody else is a playoff team. The only guy who's outside of the playoffs, Kenny Atkinson, Brett Brown are way down there on our list. Outside of that, no. It's funny because you look back a couple of years and wow, we had Elvin Gentry as a top 10 head coach after his performance. Reactionary? Yes.
I like the sticker from Jake.
And it's deserved, because it's like we were reactionary and we thought, look, he can keep this rolling and this team can be monsters for a couple of years in a row. But I look at Rick Carlisle, I do tend to agree with you on the fact that he can get a lot out of these players. And I was having a talk with somebody, I can't remember their name, going back and forth about how Luka wouldn't be the same Luka we saw this past year had he landed on a different team. Had we seen Suns Luka or Kings Luka, what would, how would he have looked? Like, Luka's still an amazing talent and best player under 20 by far, but it's still the question mark of, like, how good could he have been? Could he have been a 25-5 player? Could he have been, we were saying the bar low going in the season. I was like, I think Luka easily can come in and do like 15-5-5. Like, I think that's where he'll be, like, floor level. And he came and just blew out all expectations because he had a coach and a system.
Hey, Dave, hold my bear. That's what he did.
Yeah, he had a coach and system that bought into, like, literally, I think a week into, like, his summer camp, it was like, Carlisle was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I can't believe we got this guy. I cannot believe it. Everything around him. That's the answers. Everything is around him. And that's the realization of coach who understands what player he needs to focus on and understands how to put the right guys around him to get the most out of the entire team to make sure that player gets the best. And that's I give him the credit for it.
Jake,
he's a terrible team right now, but it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, Jake, jump in here.
Yeah, I just threw up in my mouth thinking of Suns Luka. That
You're welcome.
That one would have been ugly.
You're welcome.
But the other coach I wanted to talk about was Steve Kerr, because, obviously he's 2 and 3 on 2 of the list. But then Sean, who's usually the Steve Kerr defender on the podcast, has him all the way down at number 6.
Sean already invalidated his ranking, saying he put Carlisle at 5 to fuck with people.
If I was putting Kerr on the list, I'd probably put him below Doc, above Budenholzer.
Yeah, well, it just because Ricky was just talking about how it's for the upcoming year, and he has Steve Kerr at 2. Yet Steve Kerr's team probably isn't going to be a top 4 seed in the West this year. So why is he at number 2? Is it because of rings in the past? Even though you just said that rings wouldn't matter in the past. It's for the upcoming season. Or would it be?
No, for me, I put Steve Kerr at number 2 because yes, that team's going to be depleted this year, but they're going to be a team at the end of the year. Watch it, where they're not going to be 1 or 2, but it's going to be like, damn, how did Steve Kerr get this team to the playoffs? Because many people are writing them off. Hey, this could be the year the Warriors don't make the playoffs.
I have not heard anyone say that.
Isn't that what Greg Popovich did last year, though, getting the Spurs to the playoffs?
And I have him at 3.
Probably should have made the playoffs.
I have him at 3. I'm not really low on Popovich. Was I like next year? Like, I think with Greg Popovich, it's when you get to these top 3, it's Kerr and Popovich are basically which flavor, vanilla or chocolate, which one you like better. And then with me, Budenholzer, I think
it's chocolate or urine.
Oh, come on. That's disrespectful.
When you're comparing Popovich is LeBron level. That's what I'm saying. He is LeBron level. It's not even close.
That's great.
What?
He knows it's not Jordan level. He's LeBron level.
It's Phil.
Yeah, it's Phil.
I would take Pop.
Question marks all around. I think for me, the difference maker comes down to the Spurs team. It's just it won't die like that. That's Pop's
22
thing.
straight years.
22 straight years
since I was born. They've made the playoffs.
Exactly. They're incredible.
I was 0 years old when the Spurs made the playoffs,
and you got to count for injuries throughout all of that. You got to count for everything that came up in between the teams they had to go up against in the West. Like, yes, they haven't had success every year in the playoffs, but they've got multiple rings. They've had legacies. They've got an all-time lineup that is to be rivaled. And I look at Steve Kerr and I'm like, this guy. Absolutely, I still think top 3. I think if you put him at 3 or 4, fine. But like, he's the guy who realized that the key to success was Draymond Green. And that's why I think this year is Draymond Green is going to be the guy again. So you're going to have MVP Steph Curry when healthy, and then Draymond Green doing some heavy carrying.
And I just want to throw in there
I think Steve Kerr's going to make the most out of this.
Yeah, I'm not bashing Steve Kerr again. I just think
you call him urine.
Well,
did.
I was saying compared to Popovich.
You call them urine.
That's
compared
still
to Popovich.
disrespectful, I think.
You're saying chocolate or vanilla, and that's like, oh, it's interchangeable. It's not interchangeable.
Steve Kerr got rings.
But like the thing, and when you say the 20 years of, and that goes back to my point that I was making earlier, how far back do you go? For me, with these rankings, a couple years, if any, because 20 years ago was way different than right now.
I understand
Is
that.
this legacy or all time? And coming into this year, let me just explain. Popovich, it's a different team that he's coached before. Steve Kerr has showed me consistently with this Warrior team over the past few years how he can change with adversity. That's why I have him the highest. And then Budenholzer, I know it's only 1 year, but he seems to be, in my mind, the linchpin that if Nick Nurse and the Raptors didn't play so well after those first 2 games, because they just outplayed the Bucks after that, Budenholzer is the linchpin to get the most out of the Bucks, that I think they'll be a finals team this year and could win the finals this year with the absentee Warriors not being there. That's my mindset 1 through 3 of my rankings.
I'm going to go to this last year first before I go to a swap or anything like that. Let's look at last year in the playoffs. Who was the most successful low-seeded team last year?
The Clippers.
The Spurs.
Were they? No, it was the Spurs. The Spurs gave
I mean,
Denver
they
more
beat the
hell.
Warriors.
Clippers. Put on a show. I don't care.
They got their ass
Yes, they did.
wiped
Yes,
in
they
the
did.
games that they lost. The more
But you put Doc
competitive
Rivers
series,
at 2, which makes me think that your answer is the Clippers. You dumb bitch.
But
the more competitive series. I put Pop at 1.
But here's
No,
the
Doc
I'm
Rivers.
talking about
I said
Pop.
Doc.
I know, but I'm trying to make a point for Pop.
but devil's
And
advocate.
Pop is the best coach. That was my point.
devil's advocate. The Clippers played the best team in the West. The Spurs played a inexperienced playoff team, a Nugget team that was good in the regular season, but didn't have the
the
experience
Warriors
in the
also
playoffs.
weren't healthy.
Yeah, but they're still the fucking Warriors.
But they weren't healthy, and also with that would then discredit the Steve Kerr argument over Greg Popovich that he couldn't beat the fucking Clippers. I am looking at this, and you see that the best player for the Spurs wasn't even LaMarcus Aldridge, wasn't even DeMar DeRozan in the playoffs last year. It was Derek fucking White Jr. Who's
boy.
scouting Derek White Jr.? It's Greg Popovich. Who's going out there and putting Derek White Jr. in situations to beat the Nuggets and be a wet boy? It's Greg fucking Popovich. Greg Popovich went from a Duncan and Robinson team to a Duncan, Manu, and Tony Parker team to then a Kawhi team to then a Derek White Jr. team. Greg Popovich has been able to change every single year. This team has not seen a downturn at any point throughout his legacy, whether in the past 5 years, the past 10 years, the past 15 years, the past 20 years. He has been able to find stars in every single turn that he has taken, and he has been competitive in pretty much every single playoff series for the past 22 years.
So
and he's
they're
been able to
legacy
find...
rankings.
No,
'Cause you
because
said
last year
legacy
he was
and
doing
legacy.
it. Last year he was
He's
doing
done
it.
it year over year.
This isn't a... He's been doing it for 22 straight years. That's the thing, is if you look last year, he was doing it. If you look the year before, he was doing it. If you look at the year before, he was doing it. He's doing it every single year, and that's
proves
my
himself,
point.
yeah.
You can look at any segment of his career, and he is elevating these players to the level beyond every single NBA coach. That's why he's the greatest coach of all time, in my opinion. Greg Popovich does it year in and year out. Whether you want to look 22 years ago, or if you want to look last year, he does it.
You give him 2 guys who can't shoot from the outside. Guess what? He decides we're not going to fucking shoot threes unless you can shoot above 40%.
And we're going to be the best three-point shooting team.
He's like, look, DeMar DeRozan doesn't want to shoot threes. Guess what? He's never going to shoot a 3. As long as he wears that, never going to shoot a 3. And that's the funny thing. Like, we give him shit about his old school system, but he understands what his players can do and can't do. He knows their limitations. He knows what they can give him, and he puts them in interesting positions, because I don't know how many guys are going to give Derek White the running order. Like, just take the ball and go with it, man.
Like God forbid, Mike Budenholzer gets Giannis Antetokounmpo, and they're like, hey, we should give this guy the ball more. We should be able to maybe have some guys who could pass around him, so we give him some space. Like what are we giving him a Nobel Peace Prize because he's like, oh, we should give Giannis Antetokounmpo space?
He put an offensive system that
he
gave
did
them amazing
he did a
3-point
great job, and that's why
I
he's
mean,
top
he
3.
unlocked the Greek Freak to a level
He did
that
not
we...
unlock him. Jesus Christ.
I don't think he
He was
unlocked
most improved player
Jake,
for 3 straight
Jake,
years before Budenholzer got there.
Jake, jump in here. You got to give us something.
Oh,
I'm going to have an aneurysm.
Greg Popovich has that aura around him that, like, literally when they take somebody into the first round, I go, oh, wow, that guy's going to be an all-star in 3 years. It's just kind of like, you just like anybody who goes to the Spurs, you're like, that guy's going to be successful. And it's very rare that they're not successful. That's all because of Greg Popovich and the system that he's created and just the culture that he's built around the team. I mean, if you go to the Spurs, I mean, it's probably like the number one spot you want to go to if you're a late first round draft pick every year.
Yes.
And then, sorry, what was the other point that you made right before? Oh, Giannis. Sorry. Yeah. To say that he unlocked Giannis, I think Giannis unlocked Giannis. I don't really think that has to do with, they literally just went, let's get a bunch of shooters and let's just ISO him the entire time. And their freaking center takes like 7 threes a game. And it's just, I don't think that has to do with Budenholzer. I just think that has to do, obviously a part of it has to do with Budenholzer, but that just has to do with how great of a player Giannis is and how he's a top 5 player in the league, top 4 player in the league, whatever you want to say. I don't really think I give as much credit to Budenholzer as I do to Giannis in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, Giannis, even the year before, it's like Giannis put up 27 last year, but he was putting up 26. I mean, he was pretty much putting up 27 last year as well. I mean, Giannis was a beast the year before. He was just more efficient in the offensive system. Budenholzer, again, is still top 3, but Greg Popovich is doing this without a top 5 talent, without an MVP, and is consistently making this team competitive and hard to be kicked out of the playoffs each and every single year. And he's doing it this year. He's doing it consistently. He's doing it last year. He's doing it the year before. It's not a legacy ranking, because if we were doing legacy ranking, he'd be number 1, but he's even doing this in the present. This isn't like we're going to put Dwight Howard number 1 for center rankings because he has the best career so far. We're looking at last year, and Greg Popovich showed last year that he's still a phenomenal coach and the best coach in the league.
So yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that this team, the Spurs, and their current existence is not going to win a championship this upcoming year unless he pulls an amazing coaching job, which I wouldn't even put it past him. That's how fucking ridiculous of a head coach he is. But like, he's the best coach in the league because there's that 1% asterisk chance that this team that has no right to win a championship in the West could do it. They could just pull it off. Mm-hmm. But in all honesty, it's just the fact that he can change. He can evolve as an older head coach in this league. Change his system, change his offense, change his defense. Guys cycle in and out, and guess what? Consistently successful, no matter what happens. That's just it. It's the law of the NBA. It's like the Patriots of the NFL, Sean. And I know I'm just feeding you here, but like that, it is what it is. It's just a mark of consistent success.
And just the last thing because I've got a couple thoughts kind of running my mind, but I'm gonna kind of jam them all into one jar. Where with the consistency thing, if I can speak English, the analogy that came to my head is like where Pop is maybe more of like that consistent car where, hey, I got it back in like 1999 and it's still fucking going today. It's not a bad car. It's not a terrible car. It's a really good car and I still use it today. Where Budenholzer is probably the brand new car that everyone's hyped about because, hey, it had a really good year. That's a side one. The thing that I kind of want to end this with is, when do we, with Popovich, is it because of the legacy that, oh yeah, okay, brought them to the playoffs. Oh, they played very well against the 2 seed, but lost. When eventually do we hold it against them of like, okay, making the playoffs, even with the turnover, isn't enough. It isn't enough. When are you going to get back to being a coach that fights for the finals? Because right now, it's me with the Spurs. The Spurs are a team of like, well, they can make the playoffs, but when they make the playoffs, they're not going to go far.
Okay, here's the thing: is he had a player that could take them to the finals, and there was clearly some disconnect between him and that player and Kawhi Leonard. If he had Kawhi Leonard, they would have been a finals
I'm speaking
team.
After Kawhi.
No, I
even
understand,
about
but
Kawhi
he was put
days.
in a horrible situation where he could not keep a top 5 player in the league. We don't know if it's his fault, if it's Kawhi's fault, but if he had Kawhi Leonard, they'd be fighting in the finals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been able to bounce back from that, and I think it's a very tough thing to bounce back. Exactly. It's been very tough 2 years if you want to count the playoff, but fully off the team.
Yep.
And he's still been able to make the playoffs. Most coaches do not bounce back from that. Most franchises don't bounce back from that. Mm-hmm. He did that. And if you want to take Greg Popovich off the Spurs and put him on the Bucks, that team would have won the finals. If you want to take him and put him on the fucking Warriors with Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, and Steph Curry, I think they probably would have been pretty damn good. If you want to put him on the Jazz, again, same thing. Greg Popovich can do this on any team. He can find these players at any point. He knows what makes good basketball. That's why he's trusted with the nation's team. And yes, I understand you'd be like, oh, they're now 7th in the World Cup, but like they're playing with nobodies, and like that team is just absolute trash talent wise. And this is a thing where I don't think any of these players care. And I don't really think that's on Pop. Probably a bad time to be on a Pop rant where they're 7th losing to Poland.
I didn't
want
to bring up Poland in the 7th place FIBA finish,
but anyways, Jake, finish this out here, and then we'll move on to some other guys.
Yeah, I think Greg Popovich is the number one coach. I don't really think it's debatable. And watching that USA team lose, that was basically the Boston Celtics and Donovan Mitchell, was amazing. And while I shouldn't root against the U.S., I really do, because that was awesome to watch lose. And yeah, I mean, he's the number one. I think Steve Kerr's number two. I don't think that's really, in my mind, it's not debatable. But it's like, if you taking Kawhi Leonard off the Spurs is like taking Giannis off the Bucks. And do you think that Bud would be able to hold the Bucks to where Popovich just held the Spurs without Giannis? I think we all know the answer is no.
Maybe.
So that's why I think it's I don't know.
Hawks?
Brook Lopez, no.
Hawks team. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but the Hawks had Horford,
Yeah, but the Hawks
Millsap,
team had-
Korver,
yeah.
Teague.
Yeah, they had a bunch of B-plus players.
Yeah, but there's no other B-plus players in that Bucks team.
I mean, you had Brogdon,
Chris
you had Middleton,
Chris Middleton.
And Middleton.
and Eric Bledsoe, even Brook Lopez. Like I'm just saying, like it's not unthinkable,
And I know.
but I would put my money on Pop doing it. Yeah.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. And would you put your money that you think Bud could make the playoffs with that team where Pop did it? Pop did it in the West as well.
Agreed.
Bud's doing it in the East, which is completely a different story. But yeah, Pop is the number one coach, and I mean, you can try to make an argument, but if you make an argument, you're probably wrong against it.
All right, Ricky, let's move on. You wanted to talk about Doc Rivers. What's up with Doc?
I just feel like we got to give him a little bit of respect and talk about him. And I want to ask you why you have him at 2. This isn't an attack thing of like, how dare you have him at 2. It's just, you have him at 2, I have him at 7. Dave also has him at 7. So what in this year changed from Doc going from 11 to 2 in your rankings?
The reason why I think I've had more of an appreciation with Doc Rivers, and I think a large part of what happened was him taking away the front office duties of his job and now focus fully on coaching. And I think I was judging him too much of being a bad GM and a decent coach to now being a full-time coach and showing what he can fully do. That team last year had no rights, and this team of the past 2 years has had no rights to win over 40 games. Yet he's winning 42-40 and 48-34 and giving the Warriors trouble in the first round. That's due to Doc Rivers. He's going out there and seeing what he has in Lou Williams. He sees what he has in Montrezl Harrell. He sees what he has in Ivica Zubac. He sees what he had in Shai Gilgeous and Patrick Beverley. He's able to identify the talent, just similar to what Pop is able to do, and he's able to go out there in the past 2 years, and they're trading away his best players. They're getting rid of Tobias Harris midseason, and they get better. Like, this shouldn't
before it was
happen.
Blake Griffin. I mean, how do you get rid of your best player year over year and get better?
I think I finally realized that this team, the Clippers team that had DeAndre Blake and Chris Paul, they probably shouldn't have been as good as they were. And that's the reason why they weren't getting past the conference semifinals with that team. And I think it was mainly just due to the talent not meshing. But Doc Rivers did a fantastic job of making that whole team blend. And you look at Doc Rivers' whole hit list, and he hasn't been under 500 since 2011, 2012. He is consistently putting his teams into spots where they can win games. And he's doing a fantastic job, and he's showing that with low-level, under B-plus players consistently for the past 2 years and getting them above 500 and putting them into the playoffs. He does a phenomenal job year in, year out, and I think that if you give Doc Rivers, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George, and this is going into this season, if you give them that, we're going to see how great of a coach that Doc Rivers is. The reason why that they are for sure going to be the best team in the Western Conference, or at least going to be, probably the favorites to come out of the Western Conference this year, is not only because of the Paul George and Kawhi Leonard blend, but it's because Doc Rivers is going to make those guys fully reach their potential together because he is such a phenomenal coach. So I'm taking his past performances in, but I also think this year he's going to fully show that if you give him superstars, he can be a guy that can win the finals.
Yeah, I mean, the Clippers team this past year is pretty much, and not to get too hoity-toity here, but Aristotle quote, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Like, that's exactly what it is. It sums up to a T because on their own, each one of those guys, they're not that great. They're not top 10 players in the league. They're not top 20 players in the league. You have Lou Williams, who's 6th man of the year because he can score on anybody and he doesn't play defense. You got Montrezl Harrell, who becomes just an absolutely beast monster down low in the post. Again, great offensively, pretty good defensively too. And the rest of these pieces just fall in line. Danilo Gallinari, someone who gets no credit for being one of the best big men shooters in the NBA. Just incredibly efficient throughout his career. Just been, nagged by injury year after year, really. It's impressive to see what he's been able to do with this group. And now that, like you said, now that it's flipped over to a completely new roster and just uber talented. It's just a matter of time. This team, if they can't win a championship, I think that's a knock on Doc. If he doesn't win a ring this year, How far would you drop him down?
I think it's dependent on where he ends up. Like if he's going to the finals, then I don't think I can drop him that far. And if they're losing because of him, like how are they losing? Why are they losing? It's taken in. Like if they're getting bounced in the first round, then it might be on Doc. But if they're going to the finals and are competitive, then it obviously has to deal with how they're winning, why they lose, and stuff like that. Especially being the first year, typically these teams don't do great in their first year or win championships. But if we see year 2 he's able to go out and win a finals, I wouldn't be shocked. Jake, you want to jump in here with Doc Rivers?
Yeah. Well, he's not going to win a ring this year because Brett Brown's going to win one. But just talking about the team.
Hey, Jake, who are you a fan of?
Ring the bell, Jake. Ring the bell.
I'm actually a Bucks fan. The way that he was able to reinvent that team and using that 3 guard, like they traded away Tobias Harris and everybody's like, who's going to play the 3? And Doc's like, fuck it, we'll put Shamet there. And he was like, he ran Beverly, Shamet, Shea, Gallo, and Zubac and still made the playoffs. Like the way he reinvented that team and the way that they're going to look this year, which how much talent they have, it's going to be scary. And I used to be a Doc hater too. I thought that I used to say you only want a ring because he had the big 3 in Boston, and then last year changed my complete mind about that because they were the one. Remember they were the 1 seed earlier in the year. Like they were fantastic last year, and they didn't really have any business being as close to the playoffs or in the playoffs as they were.
Mm-hmm. Really, getting rid of his son made him a better coach in all of our eyes. I think we can all agree to that.
Yeah, well, Jerry West just
unlocked Doc Rivers.
Yeah.
I just think that Doc was underrated just because we were like, oh, he had the talent like Blake and CP3 and DeAndre Jordan. We're like, he probably should have made the finals with some of those teams. And you look at the year after the Celtics won the finals, that team wasn't fully healthy. And we were like, well, that team, again, probably should have repeated. They didn't, and I think we put too much blame on Doc there. I think Doc has been able to elevate their teams, and that was just the top end for those guys. Because we see what they're able to do. And Chris Paul isn't able to stay healthy and isn't able to contribute to this Rockets team, and that's the reason why they moved on from him. You look at DeAndre Jordan. DeAndre Jordan's now bouncing around team to team here. And you look at Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin, obviously the star of that team, but I don't think he would have reached that full potential if he didn't leave Los Angeles. So I don't think that's fully on Doc, and I think that Doc needed a fresh start, and Doc's doing one hell of a fucking job with that fresh start. So Doc Rivers, I think, deserves to be top 5 where he is at.
Yeah, and I mean, the big thing this year is like what Dave said. Expectations are high for Doc Rivers. And for me, I agree with you, Sean. Depends on how they lose. Like if let's say they don't make the finals and they lose to LeBron and AD in the conference finals. Let's say it's something like that. And, and I just threw out a team that has the other superstar powers as well. Then you'll kind of look at it and go, well, okay, how much stock do I put in there on Doc? But if it's like, hey, this team had a catastrophic year. They got upset by like the Kings in the first round.
Move them down, but I don't think that's going to happen. Isn't that the whole? I mean, that was the whole point that you start off this thing like, oh, we got to. Isn't this for going into this year? Well, I think this year they're going to be one fucking hell of a good team. So if they're not good this year, then I'm going to move them down. Yeah. Like I have no problems with that. But if your whole complaint was about Pop not being, being number one because of what he's done recently, well, I think that he's done one hell of a job, and I think now he's finally got the talent to move him up. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. Jake, you got any problems with any other teams, or you want to throw out a Brett Brown take since you weren't able to in the 11 through 20?
I don't know if I want to bring up the Brett Brown talks again, but I do. I do want to. Brad Stevens is. I mean, I'm a Celtics hater, and I understand last year wasn't a great year for him. But obviously, you can still look back 2 years ago when they were in the conference finals with a team that had no business being there. Do you think last year, I think you guys are putting a lot of blame on Brad Stevens dropping him in your list? Then I think it had to do with Kyrie Irving and how he kind of destroyed the team from the inside.
But if you aren't able to control your locker room as a head coach, doesn't that show a giant area of weakness at least? Because Brad Stevens publicly, I agree with you. He ate a lot of blame from the media. Everything that happened with Kyrie completely pointed back to, well, Kyrie's insane, but also Brad Stevens let his team get to this point. And I think there's a balance there, and I definitely blamed him for some of it. But I think for the most part, it's just the disappointment of this was a team where obviously we hoped for them to bounce back, and now they're fully loaded. And obviously Gordon Hayward's wasn't able to get right because his injury is like a 2-year recovery period anyway. But the expectations we had for the Celtics, the way they played throughout the season, the lack of teamwork, the lack of camaraderie, really, and they just looked disappointing in the playoffs. And that's the final note I've got for them. So it's like, well, Stevens, you're a top 10 coach, no doubt, but do I like guys like Quinn Snyder, who he went out there and yes, he lost in the playoffs just the same way, but that's a team where I'm like, that team is downright scary now. Mike Malone, a coach who has a young core who absolutely looks deadly during the regular season. See if he can put it together this year for the playoffs.
I think
Possibly the best center in the league as well.
Second best center in the league.
And I mean, I'm going to take the bait because you did mention Brett Brown's name. Can I ask, how the hell is Alvin Gentry above Brett Brown?
He's not.
What has
Brown's
nobody has
15,
Alvin
Gentry
Gentry at
17.
11? No, I'm saying on your list you have Alvin Gentry at 11 and Brett Brown.
Personal attack on Sean.
We talked about this back there. I think that Alvin Gentry, at least with what he's done, I don't think he's had the talent to fully prove that he's been able to make the playoffs each and every single year. Where with Brett Brown, I talked about it. I had him lower than before when I talked to you. So, I mean, your talk obviously had me move him up. But I don't think that with Brett Brown compared to Alvin Gentry, if you had Alvin Gentry on the Sixers, I think that Alvin Gentry would do probably the same job, if not a better job with the Sixers roster than the Pelicans roster that he currently has. I don't think that Alvin Gentry has consistently been fed the talent that Brett Brown has been, and I don't think we've seen him with such a talented team like he had the year before, where we went to the second round of the playoffs in the Western Conference, or like the Sixers currently are.
My final note on this, and just because you mentioned like you put this coach on this team and what's their level of success, I think the funniest out of this whole thing is Mike D'Antoni. Like, that guy cannot succeed everywhere. Like, he is in a situation where unless you have the right guard on your team, he's not a good coach.
Yeah.
Like, he's creative, he's innovative. And
So let's give him 2 good guys.
so you give him 2, and well, that's what I'm saying. It's interesting to see because I respect the shit out of him for what he was able to do, build, innovate, and change the entire style and gameplay of the NBA. But I look at him and I just start laughing. I'm like, I wonder what happens if you try to put him on a team with some of these other lineups.
Put him on the Jazz.
How would he work on the Jazz? How would he work on the Spurs? How would he do on these teams who don't necessarily run right into his wheelhouse of play style? So
None of the defense, double the offense.
it's just an interesting observation. I still think he's a top coach, but I don't think he can succeed everywhere like some of these other guys you're mentioning.
But when he succeeds, he succeeds so highly.
Oh my
God,
that's
the
he's
reason
incredible.
why. What were you saying, Jake?
But did you know that he's a Brett Brown coaching descendant? You know that?
Oh, get out of here with that. Jake brought it up. I was talking about it, and I was like, hey, to Brett Brown's credit, he's got 2 guys on this list that come from the Brett Brown tree, going to Monty Williams and Lloyd Pierce. And he's like, no, it's 3. And I'm like, who the hell's the third guy? He's like, Mike D'Antoni. And like D'Antoni coached like 10 games with him as a
It was
Sixer.
It was like 2.5 months. He was like an associate assistant.
It's like, get the fuck out of here, Jake. It's good though. The other guy I want to throw out there, and you mentioned it a little bit, is Mike Malone. Malone, I don't think is there yet. I love what he did, and the fact that he's able to use Jokic the way he is, and the way that he's able to get this offense flowing like he has been. I think it is great, but he hasn't proven himself enough in the playoffs yet to be that high. And even then, I think I wasn't even that high on him. I put him at 8.
I was really high on him. But
if you want to put Nick Nurse, who won a finals, or D'Antoni, who's obviously had consistent success, you can. But I think that Mike Malone is a guy that could take a jump this year. If he is able to get deeper.
I don't know if he takes a jump on my list. Pop fans may not be happy when he takes that jump.
Pop should be taking the jump.
Oh my God!
Final thoughts, Ricky.
I mean, this has probably been the best rankings podcast we've had all year in my mind.
My final thoughts is, how many years left does Pop have as a top coach? Like, if this year they miss the playoffs, does that taint?
Do you want to hear my troll answer?
0. You think he's
Because
done?
he's not. He's 3.
-1.
Wow. Sean, and Jake, actually, Jake, if he doesn't make the playoffs with this team this year, we're assuming a healthy DeJounte Murray, 18 guys in that backcourt who can play. Does this take him off number 1? Do you think just the running legacy argument versus Ricky's like, what have you done for me lately?
No. He'd stay on number 1. I don't think I'd ever move him.
I don't think I'd ever move them as well, because I think if they're not making the playoffs, they're like 9, and there's probably a good reason why they're not. However, if like they absolutely look awful and it's just like they're completely flat out there, I would like if they're like 10th or if they're like 12th or 13th in the Western Conference and they look horrible and they're not dealing with major injuries.
Yeah, if somebody did
maybe
Tanya Harding, LaMarcus Aldridge,
and if Steve Kerr has a phenomenal year, I think that could be the flip. Just because you see now losing KD and losing Klay Thompson and this team's still this good, I think that has to be a credit to Steve Kerr. So maybe, but I think it'd have to be crazy scenarios for him to fall.
Got it.
Those are your final thoughts.
Yeah.
Jake, you got any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, cause I know somebody in the comments is going to say it. If anybody says that Nick Nurse should be hired, just know that he literally got bailed out and got out coached by Brett Brown in the second round. That's all I'm gonna say.
Nick 4 bounces Nurse.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Anyways, shout out Nick Nurse, the guitar legend. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for our 1 through 10. Thank you to Jake for being a patron and being on this podcast. Make sure you tune to the September podcast where Jake won't be dropping due to weather concerns and we'll be giving our hot takes. And that is one hell of a segment. Last year, I came out the king. Got to try to do it again with my Nuggets take.
Wait, we were actually keeping score? I just thought hot takes were supposed to be like hot takes. Hot take.
You were one
the
for
more
two. You said
outlandish,
Jokic was
the better.
top three.
I hit on twice. You just threw out the LeBron thing and technically he was injured.
Technically injured,
technically,
yes.
it was still right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you were wrong, but like
The best kind of right is technically.
I'm saying like
Yeah,
if
exactly.
we're hitting every single mark of it, I think I was probably closer.
Every single mark. I said he wouldn't finish top 5 MVP voting. Like, you want to look over at top 5 MVP voting? Was he in there?
If he was healthy,
Was
would he
Jokic
been in there?
number 3? Nope.
If he was healthy, would he been there?
Oh my god.
I don't know. It depends where they would have finished.
Let's continue this pissing contest during hot takes next
I
time.
can't wait.
In every other segment.
Anyways,
Jake on.
let us know your thoughts down in 1 through 10. Stay tuned to the hot take segment because obviously you can see there's some contentious thoughts coming out of it already. Thank you, Jake, for being a patron, and we want to thank you guys for watching, listening, and commenting. For Ricky Widmer, for Dave Oster, I'm Sean Anderson. I was going to call you Sean Oster. For Sean Anderson, this has been the Fast Break Podcast, and we'll see you next time where Dave and I will be married.